What's up, you guys? Welcome to episode 342 of the Established Run NBA podcast. I'm Mike Gallagher with Drew Dinkmeyer to talk some electric performances from Monday.
Yeah, this was probably the most electric night in the NBA that we've had all year long. You had the combination of three big events: Joel Embiid scoring 70 points, a number we haven't seen in a bit of time, and then Karl Anthony Towns scoring 62 points in what was the most interesting thing of the night by far for me. And then, of course, Kevin Durant's incredible game winner, which we don't even need to touch on other than it was just an incredible shot by Kevin Durant. We'll touch on the surging Suns perhaps next week as they've now won 7 in a row. But this Wolves stuff is fascinating to me. And if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you've lived the ups and downs and the roller coaster of the Minnesota Timberwolves through Mike Gallagher's love of the Minnesota Timberwolves and some of the frustrations that we've had around them over times of their immaturity and their inability to play the right way in key moments, and how that kind of has hurt them at different times. In this game, in the midst of this season where they're playing so well and they're playing so maturely throughout the course of the season, they're taking care of business. They're pounding on teams that are weaker than them. They're locking in against the elite teams. They're first in the Western Conference. And we get a little slip up the last week in a game against OKC in the fourth quarter where they turn the ball over a ton. And then in this game where Karl Anthony Towns comes out nuclear hot against a Charlotte team that you expect to be able to pound, and the direction that game goes and what that means potentially for this team for the rest of the season, I think is so unique, because I think any other time that we would have seen like a 60-point scorer in the NBA, we'd be like, oh, this was an incredible game. Awesome. Shout out to them. Whether they win or lose, like incredible individual performance. But in the context of this season, and in the importance of this season for the Wolves, a team that is going to be in real deep luxury cap trouble next year, luxury tax trouble next year, I think it's so fascinating with Karl Anthony Towns scoring 62, but them losing to the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah, he had 44 in the first half, and we were talking in our Slack channel, like, Embiid had kind of put a bow on his night, and we're like, Cat may be coming. Obviously, you had the Cat Embiid beef layer, which I don't really need to talk about, but so there's so much going on here. I guess let's talk about I guess kind of how he did it, which I think is interesting. So I was looking through some of the synergy stuff. He had a season high 7 off-ball screen possessions. That's unusual. He doesn't usually do that. He's heavy spot up, rim scoring, some post up, some pick and pop, which is in the action. But they were designing off-ball screens with Rudy screening for him. I thought that was cool. And then obviously he was just hot from 3. And it's like, we'll talk about Embiid, just so different. And like Cat, greatest big man shooter of all time, according to him, was also on display. So categorically different from how Embiid just like pound inside, get to the line, all that. But anything you saw from him stylistically on how he got to 62?
I would say what you're describing is what I felt was happening during the game, which was a lot of off-ball screening. And honestly, the reason that was happening was more because that's the easiest way to get a guy the ball in position to shoot. If you like Cat from an ISO perspective, if they just try to dump the ball down to Cat and ISO him, he's going to get doubled in those situations. It's not going to be as clean a shot. He was also shooting the lights out. I mean, he finished the night 10 of 15 from 3. He was 10 of 12 to start the night from 3. So he was in rhythm with catch and shoot, and they were trying to facilitate those types of possessions. It was incredible how quickly the switch flipped, though. He started the game, and I mean, the beginning of the game, it was Karl Anthony Towns 3-pointer, Karl Anthony Towns 2-pointer. And then the next bucket was Jaden McDaniels with a 3. Then it was a Cat layup, Cat 3, Cat 3. It just all of a sudden he's got like 17 of their first 23 points, something like that. And they just keep feeding him over and over and over again. And then you could see they were playing from ahead most of this game. They were ahead by 2 at the end of the first quarter. They were ahead by 5 going into half. They were ahead by 15 going into the fourth quarter. And you could see as they're kind of playing from ahead, they're getting looser and looser with the quality of possessions and just trying to force feed Cat. And as you're watching, as I'm watching this game, I'm thinking, this is I had some LaMelo unders tied to the Minnesota money line in a parlay, thinking like, oh, Minnesota's going to roll. And as I'm seeing this happen, as they're expanding the lead, I'm still thinking this is real bad. Like these are real bad for my bets because they're not trying to run offense anymore. They're just trying to get Cat the ball. And I think it was so interesting how clear it was, which I think is interesting in the dynamic of what we've seen over the last 7-8 years for the Minnesota Timberwolves is when Karl Anthony Towns is their best player, they haven't been good enough. We saw it for a year when Jimmy Butler came into the fold, and they immediately became kind of a playoff level team with Jimmy Butler. Then famously, the Jimmy Butler Karl Anthony Towns relationship devolves. Jimmy Butler gets traded off. They go back to sort of obscurity here. Then they draft Anthony Edwards with the number 1 pick. And as Anthony Edwards has continued to develop, we've seen this team building and building and building. So it's interesting to me is the storytelling of Karl Anthony Towns. When you were the number 1, it was never quite enough. And in this night, the season of which has been Anthony Edwards' ascension and continued ascension into arguably one of the best, very best players in the league, and the guy that looks to be coming for the crown of the next great player in the league, in a season that the Minnesota Timberwolves have been the number 1 team in the league all year long. Well, now we've got a night that it's like all about Cat. And we're going to let that night happen against one of the weakest teams in the league because he's got it going. And Ant is in on it. Ant's the one helping and facilitating. Ant's not taking any shots. Ant was scoreless, I believe, going into the fourth quarter in this game because he's just trying to facilitate for Cat. And what that must mean from their relationship in terms of Ant acknowledging like, hey, you've got it going. Like, we got to get you this opportunity in a season that's been about me and us a little bit more. And for all of that to result in it not being enough at the end against the Charlotte Hornets, for them to lose the game against the Charlotte Hornets when Cat is the guy, to me is just, it's got to be a little bit of a mind trip for Karl Anthony Towns. I don't know how self-aware or introspective he is about this situation, but it's got to be a little bit of a mind trip when all the trade rumors are about you, all the future like ways that they're going to reshape the roster to potentially get out of luxury tax hell are around getting rid of Karl Anthony Towns and bringing someone else in. But those have all been put on pause because you're doing so well this season. And then it's like, hey, we've got this glimpse of what a Cat-led team is, and it's losing at home to the Charlotte Hornets. And I'm just like, I'm fascinated by all of that.
Yeah, so pretty crazy stat on the Ant factor. So on the year, Cat had 3.2 shots per game off Ant passes. On Monday, 12. Four times as much of shots from Ant passes for Cat. It was extremely unusual. Ant even said after the game that he was, getting Cat shots, hoping he would go for 100, he said. So that was pretty crazy. And then, was he sick? I don't know. It was pretty clear that he was, fine. And that was his goal, was to, assist Hunt, get Cat going, all that. And then, so let's talk about the late game. You kind of hinted at it. They were still forcing Cat shots. And you know who knew that? The Hornets. They were doubling hard. Steve Clifford was sending help early, often, the whole time. And he was shooting over the top of it. The quality of shots, as you mentioned, was terrible. Steve Clifford knew what the offense was. And NBA is hard. You don't want to have the opponent know what you're doing. And Cat kind of lost his Cat lost his touch, and they kept going to it, and the Hornets kept defending it. So it was like twofold bad, which led to the run. So let's talk about the close, because I think that this is probably the most interesting part. How many players have scored 60? I don't know. It's a lot, right? How many players have scored 60 in a close game and lost possessions on offense? Even they subbed there for that is the craziest thing about all this. He was getting subbed out for defense for Kyle Anderson, which is insane. Thoughts on that?
It's a testament to this whole push and pull around Karl Anthony Towns. The funny, not funny, but the ironic thing about all of this is when Karl Anthony Towns was drafted, and I think the thing that people were most excited about Karl Anthony Towns was at Kentucky, he was such an incredible, impactful defender. That was sort of the thing. He was this incredible, impactful defender who had touch out to the three-point line, but had not, as a lot of Kentucky players had not been able to fully showcase his offensive potential because he's playing with such other great players, and their skills kind of get hidden. We've seen this with like some of the guards that come into the league, Devin Booker, Emmanuel quickly. They're not as highlighted in college because they're playing with such other good players that you don't see one guy, you see the whole team. And Karl Anthony Towns was thought of as like this defensive force on those Kentucky teams because he was so good positionally. He made such few mistakes. He reminded me a lot of Al Horford collegiately in terms of his defense. And then at the NBA level, it just hasn't been quite the same. Positionally, he's not. Maybe it's just the quickness in the caliber of the athletes that his reaction time is being exposed a little bit more. But he has often been viewed as sort of a bit of a liability defensively, and especially since he's been moved to the 4 spot next to Rudy Gobert, it's a more challenging position. He's having to guard, more versatile athletes out there than he has before. So it's just like this whole thing that's interesting to me is this constant push and pull on like, how much do we need you? When Karl Anthony Towns is a max level player, has been the star player in Minnesota for most of his career, and obviously has a very strong opinion of his own game, which he should. He's one of the better players in the league. That's the whole thing that's super interesting to me, and how that dynamic impacts a player kind of going forward in terms of their relationship with the team, because it's got to be super fun to be part of a team that's having a lot of success, but it's also got to be a little bit in the back of your mind like, hey, how much of the success is because of me? Because when like you want to be a big part of your team having all this success as well. And I wonder if this game brings some of that stuff to the forefront in terms of the future of the Timberwolves when things get real hard, because things have not gotten super hard for them yet this year. And this is another thing that I'm wondering if this game will bring a little bit of hardship. But in the playoffs, it's going to get real hard because these teams in the Western Conference are really, really good. And you're not going to get a single series that you're going to be able to take off anytime, because 1 through 8, whoever gets into the Western Conference is going to be a challenge. And so that's what I'm interested in, is like just pulling him in this game, making a scene around him in this game. Like, hey, we can't have this happening, even though you're scoring 60. we can't have this defense happening. I think is really interesting. And I don't know that we'll get good information in reporting about what this season and what this evolution has been like for Karl Anthony Towns until many years down the road, if we get anything at all. But I just wonder what he's going through when you've got to have so much ego being the best player on that team and that franchise and the franchise player for a number of years. And then you get your one moment in the spotlight and you're feeling yourself, you're shooting from 3, you're in the 50s, now you're in the 60s, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, that guy checking in, he's for you.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, Miles Bridges was really effective because Cat was not guarding him, and we've seen like part of the reason why the Pelicans have had success against the Wolves is because sometimes Cat has to guard Zion, and Zion's like crushed the Wolves, even though he should not. Elite rim defense gets Jaden sometimes, but Cat has been a really big. Like lately, their defense is slipping a little bit, and it's largely because of Cat. And the last thing I want to talk about is a player we haven't mentioned yet, and it's a player who did not play in this game, and that's Mike Conley. They missed Mike Conley big time, and Chris Finch called it disgusting how they played down the stretch, the immaturity. It was Mike Conley. He didn't say Mike Conley, but anybody who knows the Wolves, like they're talking about, like we missed Mike Conley badly, and they almost missed him last night. They kind of hung in there against the Wizards, which would have been another like, oh my god, it would have been. We would have had a different. We were like, okay, there's still some optimism. If they lost to the Wizards, we would have a whole different tone here. But Mike Conley, man, that dude just impacts winning. We used to be everyone's favorite underrated player. He's good, man. Like the catch and shoot aspect of his game is so valuable. I don't know. I just have a whole appreciation for Mike Conley. Anything you want to add on him and his fit? It's just a perfect fit, man. Like this trade, everyone thought they gave up too much for an old vet. He still got it, man. Shout out to Mike Conley.
Yeah, this season Conley's only missed 3 games. They're 1-2 in those 3 games. One was a back-to-back at Boston. They played very well, actually. So I don't want to be too critical of this. Their one win was last night against the Wizards, a game that I thought was interesting to see how they handled. And honestly, I thought they kind of didn't approach that game as professionally as I thought they were going to. They were down by 2 at the half and had given up 59 points to the Washington Wizards in the first half of that game, coming off of this game against Charlotte where Chris Finch reamed them out about professionalism. They came out and they gave up almost a 60-point half to the Washington Wizards the next night. Now, they tightened up in the second half. They end up winning that game by 11. A fourth quarter that Karl Anthony Towns starts off hot and kind of extends the lead, and then Anthony Edwards closes it off. But it's a reminder that they have played their most mature, responsible, professional basketball consistently this year when Mike Conley has been at the helm in controlling things offensively and running things offensively. And in terms of how much time they have left with Mike Conley being able to play at this level, like this whole thing for the Wolves, everything structurally in terms of the way they set up this team, this is the year. They can't let this year slip away because it's going to be harder to build from this point forward with how dependent they've been on this aging veteran player, with where their luxury tax and salary cap situation is. It's going to be very, very difficult. So the importance and the magnitude of this year is really, really big. And they need him to be that adult in the room, because it's clear that Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns aren't ready for that quite yet. And I think I think they're both making strides. Karl Anthony Towns' defensive impact this year has been inconsistent of late, but it has been good throughout the course of the year. So like the overall course of the year, he's tried defensively. He's moved to a new position, which is really difficult, and he sort of embraced it. Of late, there's been lapses. Anthony Edwards has continued to grow this year, and I think his owning of the situation in the media after the game against Charlotte was indicative of more growth, of like, I screwed up. I lost focus of like what we were trying to do. But I was really hoping that they would come out and kind of lay the hammer down in Washington last night. And in a game without Mike Conley, they didn't. I'm interested to see how they do the next time Mike Conley's able to play, hopefully tonight. But it's 3 games now in a row to me where they've shown a little bit of letting go of the rope in terms of mentally from a focus standpoint. That fourth quarter against OKC was really bad. And it leaked into the game against Charlotte, which then leaked into the game against Washington. And I'm interested to see if this leaks further, because it's been such a good season from Minnesota. They've been pretty tight on the whole. And I think as this has been leaking a little bit, they're just 6-4 in their last 10. They've now been caught by Oklahoma City, who's now tied for the lead in the Western Conference. The defending champions are just a half game behind. The Clippers are just 2 games behind. This season, in which the Timberwolves have felt in control largely of the Western Conference standings, in the drop of a hat could be them looking at the 4th seed. And it's a whole different path in the playoffs if you have to win a couple series on the road versus if you get everybody kind of coming to your place, especially for a team that hasn't had a lot of playoff success together. So I think this is a little bit of a potential turning point in the Wolves season that I'm honed in on and paying attention to on what has been one of the great stories of the Western Conference this year. I'm wondering if there's a little bit of cracks in the armor here.
Mm-hmm. So 2 more things on the Wizards game. And this goes back to the Cat defense point. So you or anyone who's listening to this, if you want to pull up the box score from last night and you're seeing like, oh, how'd they get these points? How'd they get these points? You see, who are Karl Anthony Towns' 2 top guarded guys from this game? Give you guys a couple seconds. Take a guess. Denny Obvious, season high, 24 points. Killed them. Denny was getting easy buckets. That was Cat's primary. Who did Cat guard second? Marvin Bagley. Huge game. It was on Cat, man. Like, Cat had a huge impact negatively on defense. They got to get this corrected. It's a huge issue for them. But they can't, unless they do something crazy, which there's no reason to go there. But
this is
good.
This is also where like this is why I'm bringing up all of this, the kind of the history of Cat in Minnesota and the mental, what that might do to a player from a mentality perspective in terms of being engaged, in terms of embracing being that second lead player. it's not surprising to me that there might be a little bit of a slip after the disappointment of scoring so many points and sort of still being scapegoated, right? Like you had your big night and you're still like kind of the reason, even though you scored 60 and you're still kind of the reason. People are like, yeah, but you guys lost. And how that might affect you coming out the next game against another team that you might take for granted a little bit in Washington. And so I'm really interested to see they're on this road trip now. They go to Brooklyn tonight. Another team that you could potentially take for granted. And then San Antonio, another team you could potentially take for granted before they go to Oklahoma City on Monday. And I'm just really interested to see if the defensive slips we've seen from Karl Anthony Towns of late continue. And if we end up tying back this game to this moment to a little bit of an unraveling of what's been a really, really incredible season for the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Yeah. So playing the standings game, just where do you think they finished? Like this little lead they have, they blew it now. You know, the OKC's on them, Denver's on them, Clippers are catching them quick. Can they hold top 4? Can they get back to where they were? The Suns are coming hot. How do you think that they, before we talk playoffs and stuff, how do you think they're going to kind of finish from like a standing standpoint?
I think they will hold top 4 for sure. I think the question will ultimately be, I think 2 games is, I think they'll hold top 4 for sure. Okay. I still feel confident enough in that. I mean, barring
too
injuries,
many Bulls bets to feel that way.
Yeah, barring injuries and whatnot. But it's a big lead. It's 5 games in the loss column over the Phoenix Suns. So like that's a lot of losses. This team's only lost 13 games all year. So that's a lot of losses to potentially make up. So barring some sort of catastrophic injury, I feel pretty confident about that. I think Denver is going to finish at the top of this conference by the end of the year. Denver's schedule is really soft the rest of the way. They don't have a lot of back-to-backs the rest of the way. They are starting to find answers to the backup rotations that they've been kind of struggling for. They're finding their seriousness a little bit more. So I think Denver is going to end up finishing on top, and then I think Oklahoma City, and then I think Minnesota. But I think that's going to put them in a tough position of, you know, obviously a more difficult first round matchup. You get into the top 6 teams if you're third, as opposed to the play-in teams, and then a second round matchup if you advance that would require winning on the road most likely. And so I think this is a meaningful drop, but I think that's where we're going to ultimately see them.
Yeah, despite my freaking out, I still have faith, man. I think this team's really good. I think Ant's taking a step forward. Jaden McDaniels, they have all the components, man. Like their defense is going to be awesome. They just need Mike Conley back. I think that, and you know, that OKC loss, you know, whatever. I don't think there's anything to that. You know, OKC's really good. So yeah, I'm with you. But I would take the for sure part out of there, just because I've seen this team fall apart at times, and I mean, I don't know. That's got to be one of the worst losses this season. You know, the fact that it was at home, the fact that it was against Charlotte, the fact that 62 points. I don't know. I can't think of very many. I guess there's a couple bad Suns losses that I could talk about, but yes, it's up there for sure.
But I think all the other stuff around this loss, I think, is what makes it so uniquely bad. Is that there's this uncertainty around the future of Karl Anthony Towns in this organization, how much he contributes to winning, how necessary he is, and all of that gets put on display in a way that, look, if they're gonna win the Western Conference, they need Karl Anthony Towns to be great. Like they Karl Anthony Towns is important to. I don't want to diminish his importance to them reaching their ceiling. The question has more been how much does he raise your floor in the past, and I think that all the things that are, I don't know very many Minnesota fans well, but my guess is for those Minnesota Timberwolves fans, and leave us a comment or a note on Twitter or under the YouTube video here, but I'm guessing you're thinking of all these things of like, oh, this is how this could all go wrong. And if your fan base is thinking about those things, I tend to think the team is thinking about those things a little bit, that it occasionally leaks in. Because I do think the fan bases are, you know, they're so integrated with the team that I do think sometimes some of the feelings that are happening, like when you feel that nervousness in a stadium, when the you know, like when the hush over the crowd, I think players feel that. And so I'm wondering if this is all kind of like, you know, in the subconscious of the Minnesota Timberwolves and the fan base right now about like, is this the moment that things are unwinding a little bit for us?
For sure. So we'll be talking more Wolves, and we will get playoffs Wolves for sure. I could say for sure they're not dropping that far. But yeah, let's change gears. Let's talk about I'm sure the mainstream media is talking about Embiid first, but I don't think there's much to it, honestly. Like, guy scored 70, got hot, Spurs don't double, he gets to the line so much. Just, his offensive arsenal is insane, man. And it's all on ball. Like, it's a lot of pick and roll stuff, a lot of cutting. His size and skill is just insane. And obviously the headline here, that big game moved him to number 1 all-time per 36, which is just 38 points per 36. Outrageous, man. The guy scoring at such a high level. Anything you just want to add on the night? Well, I'll set you up a little bit more. Nick Nurse had mentioned he didn't really realize how he was having such a big number till like the third. And actually, one other thing I wanted to note too, and I talked about this a little bit about on over the weekend with Dame when he had like the quietest 45 I can remember. You felt that. You felt Cats home crowds. That was was why it felt so quiet to me. So yeah, anything Embiid on the night and just his scoring prowess right now.
I think one of the great things that we've seen especially over the last month or so for Joel Embiid is he seems to be playing with legitimate joy again. I think if you remember Joel Embiid the first few years in the league, I remember one of the guys who's having so much fun playing basketball and showcasing his talents and then getting on social media and cracking jokes. And he was having fun the first few years in the NBA. And something changed the last few years. And I think, a lot of people will cite the phrase comparison is the thief of joy, but I think the comparisons between Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid, the MVP conversations, all of these different things, I feel like got Joel into a headspace that was more of a chip on my shoulder. I'm trying to prove myself, all these different things. And he's great either way. He's one of the very best players in this generation, no matter how he's playing, whether he's playing joyous or whether he's playing with a chip on his shoulder. So I don't want to, intimate that anything within the context of his play has changed. But as a fan of NBA basketball and a person who really loved watching Joel Embiid early in his career and did not enjoy it as much these last few years because it just felt like, I don't know, it didn't feel like as wholesome and joyous and as connected to the fans. To me, it felt like a little bit more of like grudgeful and bitter. This has been really fun. I think it's been really, really fun. And I think this was like the top of the mountain for the amount of fun that we've had this year watching Joel Embiid, watching his teammates throw water on him in the locker room afterwards and stuff. And like, he's laughing and he's joyous. And like, that was awesome. And I legitimately hope that we see Embiid have the level of success in the playoffs because he's been hurt through so many of the playoffs. And that's been a big criticism of him. I've been critical of his playoff performance in the past in relation to Jokic because I felt Jokic was getting unfairly criticized for this stuff. I hope we see Embiid continue to put on these performances in the playoffs because he's such a special and incredible talent. And watching him have fun doing all this year has been really heartwarming. And that's the thing for me is the whole thing felt fun. It didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like the cat thing felt like, oh man, I hope this keeps going. Like I kind of want this to keep going, but I'm not sure that it will. The Embiid thing felt like, oh, this guy can score whenever he wants. So he's going to keep scoring and he's having fun doing this. And so like, I'm in for this, but I didn't feel like a level of like nervousness about like, if this stops, what does this mean? And I guess when I was watching the Cat game, maybe because I was financially invested on the Wolves side of things, that's why I was nervous, but I felt a little bit more nervous around the situation because I didn't necessarily expect it to continue. And that's just a testament to Embiid as a scorer, man. The guy's outrageous.
Yeah. And just going back to the fun thing, I still have Joel Embiid on Twitter notifications just because when he was at his peak Twitter days, it was the best, man. Like obviously
it was so good.
Just all the like, and even on the court, like the DX and all that stuff. He's such a fun player, and I have an Embiid jersey. And, we spent a lot of time talking about Jokic. I was such an Embiid guy, and again, I don't really know what happened, and I always like the new stuff. That's just kind of how I am. But I don't really have much to say. Like, just it's just he's got it all. He's just unstoppable. Like unless you're gonna and the other thing too that we haven't talked about yet is his passing is awesome. And you can't like send hard doubles on him anymore because he's gonna find
Yes.
guys to hit shots. So he's
Yes.
just completely unguardable. And if he plays like this in the playoffs, man, and and the other players are able to kind of hold up their own, they're gonna be dangerous. So anything
Yep.
you want to just add before we kind of talk about where this could go?
The growth in his game's been on display all year long. You mentioned the passing. I think that's the most important thing. I think, and that was the differentiator, in my opinion, between him and Jokic in past years. People would point to the defense being the differentiator on Joel's side of the equation, but I think the differentiator offensively was that Jokic handled double teams so effortlessly and so effectively that his team never struggled for offense, no matter the opponent. No matter the style. Whereas there were times that aggressive trapping or doubling teams could get to Embiid, could force turnovers against Embiid, and could disrupt the Philadelphia offense. You're not seeing that this year. They're not getting disrupted in any way, shape, or form. He's gotten very, very skilled at he's basically just playing under more control. He was a little too sped up with double teams in the past. Now he's very confident in his size, in his ability to just kind of look over the double teams and assess the situation and use ball fakes to move defenders and then move the ball, which is something that Jokic has always done naturally. I think Joel has had to work at that, but I think he's worked at it really, really well. And it makes them, the amount of shooting that Daryl Morey and the front office has put around Joel, it's just a recipe for offensive success. And he's carried an incredible load all season long. In the absence of James Harden this year, opening up more responsibility, he's taken it on with no issues. And we came into this year talking about how, like, because of Embiid's demeanor and because of the approach and some of the offseason interviews and different things, we thought this could potentially go south if things weren't really working. And it's gone the exact opposite. Like, coming into the season, I was talking about, man, there's a chance like Embiid is requesting a trade at some point this season.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so far away from that right now. We'll see what happens in the playoffs and if things bubble up again, but there's joy, there's happiness associated with Joel Embiid, and it's just been a pleasure to watch.
Yeah, he's insane. And 57 usage rate just is insane, but he's so good. So where are we at here? Are they ahead of the Bucks? We'll talk about Doc Rivers next week. Where do you feel they're at here? They've got some ammo to make a trade. They're going to miss Anthony Melton for a bit. Road code doesn't really matter. How do you feel about them? And they're certainly in the top three, but do you think that the Bucks with Doc Rivers, which is, oh my God, could you imagine that series with Doc Rivers? It's going to be so good, and it feels like we're going to get it. But yeah, How do you feel about their title chances?
Title chances, I'm still skeptical. I do think it's interesting because I think they match up pretty well with Boston. I think they can play Boston pretty effectively because they can muck things up with Boston a little bit.
Hmm.
And if you can kind of take Boston out of their flow and disrupt their flow, I think you can potentially get them into some of these 3-point shooting variance contests that can go in either direction. But with Milwaukee, I feel more confident in knowing what I'm getting from Philadelphia each and every night out. But Milwaukee is probably the most well-equipped to challenge Philadelphia from a stylistic standpoint, just because Giannis is going to attack the rim over and over again and put a lot of defensive stress on Joel to stay out of foul trouble. And then Brook Lopez is one of the bigger bodies that's a more competent defender that can also stretch you out to the 3-point line. And it's the toughest matchup for Joel, I think, in the league, because it's the combination of they have enough size to potentially defend Joel and bring help with size, right? The help that they're bringing is Giannis potentially. And that's just a lot of size for Embiid to pass over. And then defensively, you're going to ask Embiid to potentially cover out to the 3-point line on Brook Lopez and protect the rim against Giannis. And so those are big, big responsibilities for Embiid. I like their team as a whole. If you had them playing against other opponents, I'd choose Philadelphia ahead of Milwaukee. If you said, here's a sampling of 20 opponents I'm going to play, I'll take Philadelphia's results over Milwaukee. In a matchup head-to-head, I think it's tighter. because I do think Milwaukee matches up relatively well with them. It's a series that I'd be very, very excited to watch. And as you alluded to, from a standings perspective, there's starting to be separation in the Eastern Conference, and we've got 40 games left or so, 35 to 40 games left for these teams. So there still could be more room to move, but it looks like we're heading that way, certainly.
Yeah, and to your point about the 20-game sample, they kill bad teams, man. Like, it's not even close. And Bucks, they've had some bad losses. They had to sweat 2 Detroit wins that they were so tight, the wins, that they had to get rid of their coach. So and just their defense is terrible. At least the Sixers are defending really well. So they're just they're a really, really strong team, which is they're kind of Wolvesy, where they're just really, really solid, but I think they have just a little bit higher ceiling. They are a little bit, you just kind of trust them more, like you trust the process. All right. Anything else you want to mention to touch on?
Well,
here before we
do you want? Let's before we head out, let's talk the MVP odds in the shift, because on that night, right, Joel went from like 4 or 5 to 1 to the favorite and jumped Jokic from a favorite perspective. Now, the only reason Joel Embiid had dipped in the odds at all was because of the missed games clause in terms of how many games he could potentially miss the rest of the way. I believe it's 8. Is that right? That he has as a window left. So what is your read? You're the one who's always got your head in the awards game. I cannot. In New York, we cannot bet on the awards legally, so I do not have the immediate outs to do it. So my head is not in that game as much. But what are your leans on the MVP race, and how does this Monday night performance impact the MVP race?
Yeah, that's the game. I think if he gets to 65, it's a wrap. I think it's that simple. So I don't really bet MVP. Me, I like the long odds stuff. I just don't think it's worth it. But that's it, man. I think that's the whole game. I think if Embiid is healthy and he gets to 65, maybe 65 on the button could be cutting it close. But I think if he's, say misses only 5 more games, I think it's his. So I can't really give you much else. I can't predict injuries. So I think it's really that simple. I think that he's just he's literally the best scorer of all time per minute. So I think people kind of know that and recognize that, and that's kind of it. So I don't know. Do you have any different takes on it?
So just I wanted to clean up. He's played 32 of the 42 games that they've played so far. You can miss up to 17 games. You need to play 65. There is some leeway on, you can appeal if it's end of season injury or different things like that. But essentially he's got, let's say, 7 more potential misses to play with in the team's remaining 40 games of the season. So we're talking about he needs to play in 82.5% of the games the rest of the way. I think if I was to handicap this race, I think we're going to get all the information we need in the next month. I think if a month from now, he still has 2 or 3 games to play with, to miss for the rest of the season, for March and April, they'll figure out a way that he'll get in there. If he only has if he has some legitimate injury that gets it down to there's one game that they're not going to be able to finagle that enough. So I really think the next few weeks you're going to see, and I also think we're going to see, if he needs to, which I think they will make it so that he needs to. I think I don't think we're battling rest the rest of the way for Joel. I think what we're battling is legitimate injury that causes him to miss a week or something like that. But I think we will see some funny business. I think we will see some 20-minute games from Joel Embiid towards the end of the season, which I think
that impacts voting. Is it that strong of a case for him? Is it? I don't think it's that strong. Despite what I just said, if they run him out there for say 5 games at 20 minutes, would that swing you a little bit if you're a voter?
I'm interested to see. I think all of this is dumb. I think the games requirement is dumb, and I just think it's going to lead to these weird conversations. But I think Philadelphia is going to do. I mean, nobody within NBA media, they will often talk about the packets of promotional information that Daryl Morey front offices send out about their players in award season to try to promote to everybody, this is the campaign message that we have. I think this team is going to do everything they can to put Embiid in position to win his second straight MVP. And I think that's going to mean some funny business down the road.
Yeah. And last thing I'll say, so if you remember the underdog tweet where they had cited how many more games he had to miss, I like pulled up FanDuel when that tweet went out, and you could just see the odds moving. So the underdog tweet like really reframed the market. And yeah, just shout out to Underdog, man. Like anyone who bets NBA professionally, like has Underdog on notifications. But that's crazy, just how and the market could just be shaped by just news like that. All right. Yep. Anything else you want to mention to get out of here?
As always, if you're enjoying the content that we're posting, if you're listening to us on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts, we encourage you to check out the video version of this podcast on our YouTube channel, Established Run NBA's YouTube channel. You can also check out some of the videos that we post there Monday through Friday with our injury report analysis show with myself, Mike Gallagher, Justin Fan from Underdog, Mark Dankenbrink, Gary Hartman, a cast of characters from the Established Run team each and every weekday at 2:00 Eastern, breaking down the injury report for that day's slate and commenting on how impactful we think these injuries are, whether players are likely to sit or not. Mike Gallagher on starters jersey watch as we try to identify who's going to play and what roles that night. You can check those shows out on our YouTube channel as well. We are trying to get to 5,000 subscribers on that YouTube channel by the end of this NBA season. So if you are liking and enjoying this content, the best way to support us is to check out that YouTube channel. And of course, make sure to smash that like button on any of this content and give us that subscription. Hit the bell to get notifications whenever new content is posted. All the great things on the YouTube channel help us continue to support and grow our quest over on YouTube.
Yeah, hey, tell some friends. We're not as in the season-long streets. I used to do a lot of season-long content, and I would find out people wouldn't share season-long content because usually the people they're friends with are in the same leagues. But hey, your friends, you want to make money too in the gambling streets, so we're digging into that with some DFS as well. So appreciate you guys. Catch you guys next time.